You're listening to a 3CR podcast of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia.
Radio MMT respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting, the Wurundjeri people, and we are broadcasting to the Kulin Nations. Our focus is economics, that is, how stuff is produced and distributed. We recognise that for many tens of thousands of years, First Nations people's connection to country successfully embodied the world's oldest continuous economy, which was catastrophically disrupted by genocide and displacement. We acknowledge that we have much to learn to reshape our current extractive and exploitive system to achieve sustainable prosperity for everyone.
Radio MMT. Economics for the rest of us with Anne
and Kev.
Radio MMT.
Looking at the world through the lens of modern monetary theory.
Radio MMT. Macroeconomics for a well-being economy.
Macroeconomics? Isn't that incredibly boring?
No, Kevin, it's incredibly interesting. It's all about who gets what and why.
Who gets what and why? Okay, I'm in.
RadioMMT@gmail.com.
Incredibly interesting macroeconomics for the rest of us. Welcome to Radio MMT, and this is an unusual show for us because it's not the second or the fourth Friday of the month; it's the fifth Friday of the month, which happens every now and again. It's a bit like a blue moon.
I never knew about the fifth Friday until we were doing this show, and now I've discovered there are 4 of them a year, and this is the one that we're doing this year, this fifth Friday. It feels almost like February 29th.
Yeah. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like a leap year. It's like we get Leap Fridays.
Leap Friday, that's what it is.
So we might be speaking to people who don't normally listen to us, Anne.
Mm-hmm. They've tuned in on the fifth Friday expecting who knows what, and they got us.
And they got us. Yeah, well, So do we know what we're going to talk about this week?
Well, I think we'll have to stay on theme here, Kevin.
Yeah.
It's always the economy. It's always macroeconomics.
Yep.
And I'm so pleased when people join us for the hour because I think we all need to wise up about what's going on with the economy and why it seems to benefit some people and not benefit other people.
I can't understand, in the world that we live in, how so many people don't know about the economy. It's central to how a lot of people live.
Well, I quite happily walked around thinking, leave it to the experts.
Yeah, and as it turns out, we're not. Do we call ourselves experts?
We talk to the experts who seem to know what they're talking about.
We're mouthpieces for the experts. We would one day like to be experts, but that might take a bit of time.
And, I was thinking the only reason I'm in this, Kevin, doing this with you on these second and fourth Fridays and every now and then the fifth Friday is because we do know what the solutions are. So It's not just critiquing the problems, and it seems to be everyone points to the economy as the source of our troubles, whether it's the poly crisis, the climate change, whatever's going on. The solutions are all at our fingertips and all we have to do is reach out.
And occasionally you see people using the solutions that are obvious to you and I and anybody else who has an MMT understanding of the economy. We saw what the Morrison government did during COVID. We called it before. I remember we were on a show...
Tuesday Breakfast, I think it was.
Tuesday Breakfast, early in COVID, and they're all freaking out. We've gone, they'll have to. They'll just have to spend money into the economy, otherwise it'll collapse. And lo and behold, they did. So it's actually reassuring to know some of the options, and it's reassuring to see some of the least likely candidates, people like Morrison and Conservative governments, reverting to a pragmatic and sensible use of public money.
Which makes you think they know what they're doing.
Well, they know that they can do it, and they've tried it, and the sky didn't fall in. So that's kind of reassuring.
You know what else it is apart from the fifth Friday?
Yeah, what's that?
It's the last day of the financial year,
June
30.
June 30.
Which means it's the last day of Radiothon here at 3CR.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we've been going okay with our target. I think we're...
Not too bad. We're sort of sidling up to our target there.
Yeah. It's our first year broadcasting as Radio MMT. And so for us, it's kind of like... there's honour involved, Anne. If we
can hold our heads up if we make our target.
If we fail miserably, it'll look a bit shaky, and we're going to be in dire straits. Not that we should be judging ourselves by money. I'm quite disrespectful of the whole capitalist system.
But it is nice to think that you're pulling your weight and helping to keep this place operating, helping to keep the building going and the studios going and that antenna thingy that's somewhere going.
Yeah. Now, look, we are quite close to our target, but we're not quite there. And I like the approach of, we've had a couple of $5 donations and $10 donations, like small ones. And I really like the idea of lots of people giving a little bit. To me, that works, because if everybody just gives a little bit, everybody gets to have a piece of it.
Spreads the load, doesn't it?
They can feel connected. They can feel some ownership. They don't have to, go into austerity mode to run their lives. And it kind of works, and it's a very communal thing.
$5 isn't too much for a feel good feeling, is it?
$5 or $10. If we had 10 or 20 people given $5 or $10, that would probably get us over the line. And
when you do it, just imagine that there's bunches of other people doing it. So even though it might feel a bit silly to hop onto 3cr.org.au, hop onto the website /donate.
Yeah.
Even if it feels a bit silly just to put $5 in there, just remember that there's probably hundreds of other people doing the same thing.
I don't think it feels silly. I reckon that's a really good model. I always like giving away spare change and little bits and pieces to worthy causes, like people who clean my windscreen at the intersections.
Yeah,
love offloading my change, because if everybody did that, everything
they'd
would be
have
sweet.
a good day.
Yeah. It's a good approach.
We have had some people donating to Radio MMT, so I hope that means you've been bitten by the MMT bug and you're just as enthusiastic about economics as we are. My favourite outlier geographically is Jack from Honolulu.
Oh, wow. Did we get someone from Honolulu? Excellent.
Isn't that great?
Oh, sensational. I so love digital radio. Yeah.
Everybody else, I'd say, is within the city of Melbourne.
The city of Melbourne, okay. Well, so we've got to start working on our international audience.
Our international presence. But it does go to show how locals are really appreciating the institution that is 3CR. It's a unique radio station in Australia.
Indeed.
And my other favourites, Lee from Brunswick. Thank you very much, Lee. And thank you very much, Adrian from Mentone. And James from Parkville. Thank you very much.
Good on them. So we've got a bit of Southside action happening here, which is good. That's good. I may have been coerced by another Southsider. I think there's a Mads from Aspendale who wants me
I've got a Mads from Aspendale
who wants me to play a song later on. So is that payola? Are we getting into trouble?
Maybe next year we can auction off the song segment.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So we'll be honouring that obligation,
because we are capo dogs.
We are. Well, yeah. And I think my mum was a capo dog, and my dad was a capo dog. So,
can't help ourselves.
But you get caught up in the capo thing. Even if you don't want to be a capo dog, you have to sort of, they're all around you and they charge you money for stuff. And if you haven't got it, then so you got to play the capo game a bit. And this is what we're doing here. We don't endorse capitalism. We think that it's a terrible system. What would you call it? The over accrual of wealth, personal wealth, I think is a bad thing.
Capitalism has gone awry. But
however,
there are alternatives, and alternatives that will benefit the well-being of people and planet.
So, look, we are trapped by capitalism, but at least we can start dealing with the inequality thing. So if we can level the playing field a bit, if we can get some people to give to our community radio station here at 3CR, it's not what you call the flashest radio station in Melbourne.
Oh, they run a tight budget around here.
They do in terms of fit up, but the people are top notch. It's what we mightn't have in quality of facilities is more than made up for by the quality of the people at the station. And we do have the backing of some experts on this show as well. We have Professor Bill Mitchell from MMT Ed, who is associated with this show, and he guides us along our merry way with advice.
He does. He contributes to every show with his letter from the Cape, and of course he's contributing to us behind the scenes as well. And Bill Mitchell, he is the fellow who saw through. It's like he pierced the veil along with a couple of other economists to see through all the fog that surrounds the economy.
That is good. I've been reading a bit of his book, which he's written with two others, Randall Ray and Martin Watts. And there's a bit of a history of economic fields, like the classicists and
been a battleground for hundreds of years, hasn't it?
It has indeed, and it's very interesting to see. But Bill's by no means alone. He draws from.
He stands on the shoulders of giants.
Giants, like he says, we must read the classics, which is Keynes and Marx.
John Maynard Keynes, Karl Marx, and the institutionalists. I'm still learning about them. I think Veblen is one of them, and then your buddy Kalecki.
Kalecki, I didn't realise that Kalecki was my buddy, but we think alike, as it turns out. So that's quite nice. But look, shall we have a listen to the aforementioned Bill Mitchell with his letter from the Cape?
Let's do it.
It's time for a letter from the Cape
with economist Bill Mitchell.
Hello. Earlier this week I was in Perth presenting to a group of healthcare professionals, all highly educated, networked and passionate about their profession and the impact it can have on the well-being of our citizens. The conference facility had a live polling capacity, which means presenters could pose questions and the audience could monitor in real time as the answers were unfolding on a large screen in the auditorium. My questions were in fact proposals, the first of which went like this. The Stage 3 tax cuts that overwhelmingly favour the high income earners should be scrapped so that the federal government has more money to spend on healthcare and education. True or false? Most chose true and were wrong. Even progressive people who care about improving the scope and quality of public spending on healthcare and education usually fall into that trap. Underpinning their answers is a belief that somehow the Australian government needs our money in order to spend. That somehow, if we abandon those Stage 3 tax cuts, then the government will be able to redirect the funds that they would forego as a result of the lower taxes into healthcare and education. This belief is so pervasive that it has crippled the quality of the public debate about what we should expect from our government and allowed governments of all political persuasions to take decisions that actually undermine the well-being of the present generations and certainly the future generations. Many progressives feel warm at rallies chanting, "Tax the rich," or flooding social media with the same calls. They mount elaborate moral arguments that the rich should pay more tax so that the less well-off can have better healthcare or better childcare or more educational facilities, or you name your preferred public wish list component. The problem is that this entire debate is being conducted in the fictional world created by economists. The entire tax the rich mantra might make us feel good that we have seized the answer to our problems and we are going to make those rich bastards pay. But in chanting the mantra, we are just expressing our ignorance and ceding ground to those who want less spending on welfare and more on procurement contracts for profit-seeking corporations. Whenever you hear this mantra, remember the MCG scoreboard. It can post points on the digital screen whenever it likes, just as our national government can spend into existence as many dollars as it desires. We should never conflate rising tax revenue with an increase in the financial capacity of our government to spend. We pay taxes and are taxpayers, but those taxes do not provide the government with any extra spending capacity. In earlier episodes, we learned that, among other things, the function of taxes is to deprive us of disposable income so that we cannot spend as much on goods and services, which in turn allows the government to conduct its spending program and use productive resources without creating inflation. Remember that the productive resources available to a nation at any point in time are finite. The role of taxes is to reduce our ability to command some of those resources so that the government doesn't have to compete for them by inflating prices. The point is that the tax revenue gained from abandoning the stage 3 tax cuts will provide the government with no extra financial capacity. The decision to spend on healthcare or education is a political one, presuming that there are sufficient productive resources available, like doctors, nurses, teachers, infrastructure builders, and all of the other inputs that are required to provide these essential services. It is the availability of those resources that may constrain government spending on healthcare and education, not its ability to purchase them if available. We should never get sucked into the so-called zero-sum game narrative that we cannot have A if we have B because there's not enough money for both. There is always enough government money if there are available resources. Does that mean I reject the proposition that the rich should pay more tax? Of course not. But I would never argue that we should raise taxes so that the government can have more money. It has all the money it ever wants. Its spending is constrained by the available resources that it can bring into productive use without generating inflationary pressures. At certain times, such as when the economy is at full employment, a rare occurrence in this neoliberal era, the constraints will be more severe. When there is mass unemployment, then there are very few constraints on government spending. So why would I tax the rich more? Simply as one way that we can reduce their power to influence the public debate through control of the media, through funding of think tanks and lobbying organisations, through funding of political parties, and all the rest of the ways that those with lots of cash can splash it around and get what they want at the expense of the many. I'll be back next time. For now, see you later and take care.
You're listening to 3CR 855 AM on digital and on the internet, www.3cr.org.au.
Well, that was Professor Bill Mitchell.
Yeah, no, and look, I like what he says. Like, we have this discussion quite a lot about people want to lay into the rich, and there's many reasons why people want to lay into the rich, but they use this excuse that the rich have to pay for everything else, and then they raise the argument, well, why should we pay for everything else if we got rich? That was our good luck, and you guys look after yourselves, and then you have the whole thing starting off. And
we could just sidestep that whole argument, that whole. I think about how much activist energy has gone into over the years of thinking that we have to tax the rich and finding ways to tax the rich and saying that we really can't do X, Y, Z until we've taxed the rich, until we've gone to Gina, sort of half emptied her bank account.
Yeah. I like to put forward this proposition. How about this? Okay, so let's say the problem with the rich is inequality. They breed discontent in a society. So if their wealth, if they're getting rich by driving wages down, if they're getting rich by having a pool of unemployed to keep wages down, if they're doing things which harm people to get rich, then let's hone to the rich. If they have undue influence, if they are able to buy political influence, buy regulatory influence, and to turn society into how they want it. And remember that the rich, it's a smaller number of people with a larger and larger amount of money. So we're now talking about the top 10% owning 90% plus of the wealth, and it didn't used to be that way. I was looking at some figures.
It's changed over the years.
Yeah, just after World War II, the top 10% owned 20% of the wealth, and the other 90% of the population. This was in the United States. The other 90% of the population owned 80% of the wealth. So that's kind of like a nice spread. And it was pretty good up until the 70s.
A very interesting decade, the 70s.
Yeah, and then everything changed. And so when you have that inequality, when you have rich people being really rich, we should tax the rich to flatten that out for sure. But let's say we could regulate all that stuff. Let's say that we could say just because you got money, you can't buy political influence because we have regulations against that. Let's say that if you're going to be really rich, and we can support the less fortunate in our community, so that we look after people in our community, that everybody has a decent roof over their head, which is entirely possible. We did it during COVID. Like people talk about this stuff like it's fanciful sort of theory. We did it. We put homeless people in accommodation. We doubled New Start overnight, and a Conservative government did it. So let's say everybody in society was doing well in terms of basics, and then, well, you could let the rich be as rich as they want, and I've got no problems with that. I'm just proposing the devil's advocate thing here, is that if we could address the problems of extreme wealth other ways.
We're going to have to do a whole show about the rich, because I think there are links to the downward pressure on the bottom and the expansion of poverty and this mega wealth that we're seeing. So the two go hand in hand, and you can't just deal with the lower end through government spending without also dealing with what's going on with this wealth that's accumulating at the top.
Well, as you and I and Koleski have discovered in our little discussions together, and we know that we can go back through this, have a listen to some of our previous episodes on podcast if you like, but there is this relationship between public money and profits, and profits are derived from public money. So what essentially that means is that when the government spends into the economy, the money cycles around, changes hands, and filters through the economy and ends up in people's accounts. But it's all public money, and so people think that their money is private. They think, I earned this money. I was very clever, very entrepreneurial, I worked hard, so I deserve all this money. All their profit was originally public money. And so we as the public need to have some sort of ownership over how we distribute that through an economy and the effects that we'll have. So sure, you're rich, you worked hard, whatever. How much money should you have? Should you have billions of dollars? Should you earn thousands more than your employees? And it's a question of balance. And I don't think anybody would be overly resentful if these things were brought back into balance.
Well, I think the eye-opening thing for me with modern monetary theory is once you understand that the federal government, can never run out of Australian dollars, because dollars are really just like points in this game that we call the economy, and the federal government's just like the umpire. So once we understand that the government can never run out of money, then we immediately see that the taxes that the federal government are issuing are not funding their spending. And then we can be much more assertive about insisting that they spend on the things that are going to enhance our well-being. And so I think one of the main messages coming out of MMT is we don't have to let the good ideas stall on this assumption of finding the money, as Bill said. And, we could do everything from, I've heard recently, they need funding for better care for women after giving birth. They need, they say that the Murray-Darling keeps running out of water because they can't afford the inspectors to go out to make sure that what the water usage is on the ground. Well, of course we could afford the inspectors if we wanted to.
Yeah, if we've got inspectors around, if we've got people who are capable of doing that job, then the government has the capacity to pay them. And like you say, we're held up with these outdated and irrational processes of classical economics that says that everything has to be paid for from a finite supply. It's completely the wrong way to think.
Yeah. And it's so counterintuitive. I can understand why a lot of people, when they first hear this, because it goes against your own experience of money, because you think, the federal government must just be like my household and my budget, which it's not, because they're the currency issuer and we're the currency users. And it even goes against what state governments and local governments have to do. They do have to find the money either through taxing or through being funded by the government.
Yeah, the federal government, the central government, yeah. Yeah, and this comes back to a discussion that you and I have been having quite a bit recently, and I think we're going to go into this further, and it's about the origins of money. And so if people regard money as something that has its origins in the private sector, that private entities created money, which is to say that it evolved from something like the barter system, well, then they have this kind of this ownership over money. They think, well, I created the money, therefore it's mine, and I should be able to keep it.
It's a very individualistic approach.
Yeah. Now, our understanding, and we are going to explore this in much greater detail later on, is that that's just not the case. There's no economy that was ever set up that evolved from the barter system. So that's not the origins of money. Money was always something that originated from government, from regulation. It was a way to control behaviour in a community. And if you need any proof of that, if you do actually have any cash in your pocket, pull it out and you'll see on our notes that it says Reserve Bank of Australia created that dollar.
It's got Phil Lowe's signature on it, doesn't it?
It's an instrument of government, okay? It is definitely an instrument of government. If you had a whole bunch of private currencies in operation, it would be a dog's fight. It would be a dog's breakfast. It would be a mess. I'm trying to think of the right metaphors. Dog's messy breakfast. A messy
dog's hind leg breakfast.
Speaking of which, do you know how many dogs? I'm staying in a house at the moment, and there are currently 4 dogs.
Oof, you've got a pack.
Oh yeah, no, it's very unusual, but it would be like that. It would be like dinner time at the house that I'm living at the moment. There'd be people raiding each other and going in sideways, and it'd just be mayhem. So to feed those dogs properly, what needs to happen is the person who controls the house needs to separate and organise and regulate the behaviour of these dogs, and it's centrally controlled. And it's the same. It's the same with currency. I think it's a beautiful analogy. I'm so happy with that one.
Nice one, Kevin.
Just came to me from somewhere.
You're inspired tonight on the Fifth Friday, the things it does to you. Well, the more I learn about money, the more I think of it as part of our collective heritage. It's a public utility. There's the public purse, and we're not told about it. And once we learn about it, then we can have a say over how it's spent.
Yeah, and being a public utility, it should be created and injected into the economy for the public well-being, not for private well-being, but for the public well-being, for the public good. And I think that's where we've lost the way, particularly over the last 40 years with this neoliberal focus, is that we view money as something that individuals can accumulate. And
that the government should get out of the economy, and it's fundamental to the economy.
Which is exactly the opposite way to think of things. Anyway, I think that I need to honour the obligation to one of our fine donors and play a song that was requested by an excellent band called Phil and the Tiles. This is a song called Elixir.
Where we drank the elixir.
Radio MMT.
The Facts About Economics with Anne and Kev. Bringing you fair and balanced reporting.
They are bastards, utter and complete bastards, Anne.
That's right. We're really digging into this bastardry.
It's a smokescreen for corporations to increase their profit margin.
All these big lies.
Corporate profit and greed.
They're considering it in their evil plans.
He's the archetype megalomaniac neoliberal.
The government pretending to be there for the people.
The neoliberal ethos of squeezing workers.
This power struggle is continuously playing out under our very noses.
So it's simplistic and it's inaccurate.
What kind of an economic recovery strategy is that?
Do you reckon it's more effective to say it's spurious to say the least, or it's bullshit? Radio MMT.
The second and fourth Friday of each month.
Between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m.
Here on 3CR Community Radio.
And occasionally the fifth Friday of each week too, which is what we are today. And I'm doing this
Leap
fifth
Friday.
this special edition, fifth Friday. Now look, we haven't forgotten about the Radiothon. We still need people to just kick in $5 or $10.
That's right.
$20. I remember we had a show a little while ago, and we were talking about lawyers who earn about like $600 an hour. Mm-hmm. Do you reckon? And I planted the seed back then. I thought if we got one of those rich lawyers just to delve into his, her, their sullied conscience, because if you're charging that much money, you're not on the right side of.
We were going to help with their karma points, weren't we?
You're not a legal aid lawyer if you're charging that amount of money, and you can still do that. Like we're almost at our target, but if we doubled our target because somebody saw the light and touched into their soul, that would be nice.
There's a vision.
That would be good. Yeah.
Well, we do have Elizabeth has donated, as has Jane from Fairfield and Joe from Garden Vale. So thank you very much to everyone.
Excellent.
And I can guarantee you will not find another show like Radio MMT anywhere on the airwaves in Australia, because I do know that our economists struggle to get any kind of airplay in the media, and often they get the reverse. They get lambasted for saying simple things like the Australian federal government can never run out of dollars, because, of course, it does expose where the real issues are, and it does expose where the lack of political will is.
Hey, what do you think we should talk about for the rest of the show? I've got a bit of a clip.
Yes, that was from the Adelaide Festival Writers' Week back in March 2023, a few months ago.
Yep.
But we could have a listen. That was a panel session that was chaired by Paul Barclay from ABC Radio National. And the panellists were an interesting bunch. There was Richard Dennis, who is an economist and executive director at the Australia Institute. And they're a pretty progressive bunch over there.
They're a progressive bunch, not like the IPA. It's hard. You get confused. You've got the Australia Institute, which is the AI, and the IPA, which...
you want to sort of know the difference there.
Yeah.
Then we also had Alan Kohler, who is a financial analyst in various media outlets.
Hey, we might be interviewing Alan Kohler in the future.
We might be hearing from him. Hey?
Yeah, that could be interesting.
Yeah. Alan Kohler is very interesting to us because we do believe he knows a little bit about modern monetary theory.
Yeah. So that could be an interesting thing to listen to.
And on this panel also was Wayne Swan, who is a former federal treasurer with the Labor Party, most notably during the GFC. And the topic of the panel was based on a book written by economist Richard Dennis. The book was called Big, The Role of the State in the Modern Economy.
And I'm always particularly interested by Wayne Swan because I don't know how much he knows or believes. He's really hard to read. Sometimes I think he knows how the economy runs and what his restrictions are. And then other times he just trots out the orthodoxy so convincingly. I sometimes think, maybe I don't know.
Where are you? So I think we might hear some of that contradiction in this clip.
And these conversations are interesting for what's not said and how things are said and the choice of words. Like if you hear somebody say taxpayer money or public money, there's a big difference. The little words, the nuances become more and more interesting. But let's have a listen.
I'd like to ask each of you for this answer. Can a government with a sovereign currency ever run out of money?
No.
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 Well, that was easy.
The only limit on government on deficits is inflation.
And your credibility.
Well, yeah.
And just in case people miss the significance of that, the idea that we can go bankrupt as a nation is absurd. It's a neoliberal idea designed to make us scared of public spending. So our kind of household notion that you want to pay your debt off one day soon is precisely irrelevant for a nation state that should be planning for a long, happy future.
The federal government has to do something over time, responsibly, to decrease debt levels. There's no question about that. But it has to be done in a way which continues to promote economic growth and ensures that the benefits of that growth are more fairly spread around the country.
There's never been the amount of debt in the world as there is now.
There is $1 trillion worth of debt. Some of it does need to be paid down, and the government has to be ambitious about how it raises its money, and it has to be very targeted in how it spends its money.
In the 80s and 90s, the size of government didn't shrink. What happened was the funding of government switched from taxes to issuing bonds to debt. And so what we find now is that governments are still quite large, and they're being funded by deficits.
We had a long time, Wayne, when budget deficits were just seen as an inherent evil. They dominated election campaigns. Then, as you say, along comes a catastrophic pandemic. We need to spend a lot of money to protect people, to protect jobs. We did. It was successful on the whole. Do you think that's changed overall our view of budget deficits? Are we a bit more comfortable now with debt and deficit, and is that a good thing?
Well, I think everyone here would well remember how the Labor Party was demonised for deficit and debt, not just through the GFC, but for the decade afterwards. It was the source of all evil in the country and in society. And of course, when the coalition got mugged by COVID, suddenly deficit and debt's okay now. So $1 trillion worth of debt apparently is okay.
There's now an issue which I'd like to hear Richard talk about a bit, is how larger government is going to be funded.
Is it not self-evident that if you want better social services, that you need to collect more money to pay for those social services, though?
Of course, but I think people need to be taken on the journey.
We're a low-tax country, and we can't have world-class services, world-class infrastructure and world-class equality if we want to have a tax system in the bargain basement.
It's a simple equation. If you want high-quality public services, if you want better schools, better health care, better aged care, better disability care, you name it, you have to get more tax to pay for it. Why are those words so difficult for politicians to mouth?
Well, they're not, and they were mouthed by the Treasurer this week. But you wouldn't know it from the din that went on. I mean, the truth is he put forward a very modest proposal to raise some more money to put into all of those services. Now, Australia is about to go through, or is going through, two very big transitions. One's decarbonisation, and the other one is a more limited form of what I call reindustrialisation. And that is going to demand a joint approach from government and the private sector if we're going to make the transitions through both those big structural changes. As we've heard before, the government balance sheet is maxed out. We've borrowed a lot of money, we've got $1 trillion worth of debt. And it just makes sense for the public and private sectors to come together and make the investments for decarbonisation and reindustrialisation that do need to be made.
Where is the money going to come from if you've got the two major political parties in Australia in favour of tax cuts for the wealthy?
I mean, I've done a lot of work on modern monetary theory, which I'm happy to talk about if we want to, which is really not really about money. It's about fiscal policy and how government is funded and whether deficits are a bad thing and so on. I mean, I think, and if you looked at the October budget that the Labor Party had, it predicted a deficit of $50 billion forever. And I think that's really quite interesting, actually.
So what's really interesting about a conversation like that, which would be very confusing to anyone who's got no orientation to macroeconomics, is we started with the whole panel and the audience agreeing that the government can never run out of money, the Australian federal government can never run out of Australian dollars. And then by the end of the conversation, we're talking about how we're going to have to raise taxes, how we're going to have to pay back the debt, and how we need these public-private partnerships.
It's kind of infuriating, isn't it? You listen to it and you hear these contradictions, which you cannot run out of money. you all agree that you can't run out of money, and then you start talking about how you're going to run out of money. It's
Well, Stephanie Kelton has a really good way of navigating through these confusing conversations. She has a really good framework, and she describes what she calls deficit owls, deficit doves, and deficit hawks. And the MMT, or the Modern Monetary Theory School that Stephanie Kelton is an economist of, she would call herself, and we would call ourselves, deficit owls, which is that we say that you don't have to worry about the deficit or the surplus. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just a number that falls out of the barrel at the end of the year. But then you can compare that to the deficit hawks, which that would be like Peter Costello, our ex-federal treasurer with the Liberal Party, and they believe that you need to balance the budget. You really should be taxing and spending the same amount so the budget is balanced, and you really should pay back the debt as soon as you can. And then you've got the deficit doves, who they would be like Wayne Swan, I think, where it's like, well, sometimes, you can't balance the budget because that's what life is. So sometimes you have to have a deficit, which means you've spent more than you've taxed, and you kind of pay back the debt when you can.
Yeah, and it was interesting listening to Alan, especially towards the end there. It's difficult in mainstream circles to talk about something as common sense and pragmatic as how the economy actually runs. You're speaking there with a former treasurer, and it's so ingrained. They won't allow themselves to think any differently. They've painted themselves into this persona, and for them to start talking differently and to contradict a lot of how they operated back in the day is an emotional journey that none of them are really prepared to take. Yeah. And so what we've got is a system that is hamstrung because we're looking after people's fragile egos at the same time as we're sacrificing people to unnecessary poverty. We're restricting what we could do with education and health. We're putting the handbrake on all of these really good things which are for the well-being of society. And we're doing this to protect the egos of people who have been calling the shots.
Yeah. It's also, I think, I do hear a lot of people mention this thing called cognitive dissonance, which is MMT is asking us to do this whole paradigm shift. And so you've got to shift your whole worldview. And it took me quite a while to understand this business about taxes, because I always thought, well, why would taxes destroy money? Can't you just recycle the money?
Yeah.
And so it does take a while to understand that these are accounting operations.
So it's money in, money out. And so talking about destroying money, actually, I've told you that story about the KLF, haven't I? The KLF with this band during the 90s, and they were this. I'm sorry, I'm going to sidetrack. It's a Fifth Friday.
It's a Kevin story. It's a Fifth Friday. Let's go.
So the KLF with this band, and they were very anti-capitalist, very anti everything. They were, and so they're just making music, and they become really popular. But in the process of becoming popular, all the major labels said, come and sign with us. And they said, no, bugger that. We're not into this major label stuff. We're just going to, just look after it, do our own thing, which meant they got all the money, which meant they ended up earning a truckload of money, right? They were really successful, really, really successful. They're gone, oh, shit, everything that we're trying to sing against and rally against, we're becoming that animal. So they made just a truckload of money. They were really, really rich. So what they did at the height of their popularity, they disbanded, and they took $1 million in cash to a small island in Scotland and set it on fire.
Oh, wonderful.
So you can actually burn it, but see, that would be illegal.
Could have given it to 3CR.
Well, they could have, yeah. But the whole point was that this stuff is ridiculous and it's bad and it's used badly and it changes people, and they're right. I
think actions like that is where people are mistaking money as a thing. They're not seeing it as a system.
Yeah, and what we're talking about is when you destroy money, it's you've got money on your ledger sheet, it goes in and it comes out. When it comes back, you just zero it out. So maybe the destruction of money is too harsh a term. We're talking about an accounting spreadsheet where things get zeroed out.
Money gets created on the spreadsheet and it gets zeroed out on the spreadsheet.
And that's it.
And it's like the economy is one giant spreadsheet.
Yeah, all the accountants out there, they appreciate that.
Radio MMT. Economics for the rest of us with Anne
and Kev
at 3CR Community Radio, Melbourne, Australia. The only way I can maybe excuse or understand this cognitive dissonance where people are still talking about having to fund government spending with taxes, even though they've just said the government can never run out of money, is I have heard now people saying, well, there are different definitions of fund. What do we mean by funding? And so the old neoclassical definition of funding is finding the money. So it means the government has to tax us to get our money, or it has to go to rich people and borrow their money. So that's the old definition of funding. And there's a new definition of funding where people might be talking about, well, we have to find the resources. So what we're doing is what Bill was talking about, which is creating the so-called fiscal space. In other words, we're having to tax in order to do our spending because we want to be able to stop people in the private sector buying up the resources that the government wants. So, for example, you would be taxing your multi-millionaires so that they couldn't be building their yachts and their underground bunkers, because we actually want to use those construction workers and all of that material and all of those skills to do our things, which would be like fast rail between capital cities or something like that.
Yeah, that would be nice. But it frustrates me, that whole fast rail thing. I just want to catch a fast train to Sydney.
Wouldn't that be great? Oh. But anyway, I think, if people really are genuinely in good faith saying we need to fund government spending through taxation, and what they mean is we're creating the fiscal space so the government's got the resources, I don't think they should use the word fund.
No. Does this come into the crowding out theory of funds that the neoliberals use, or the classical?
Well, they think the government shouldn't spend into the economy, or it shouldn't borrow money, because there's a limited supply of money. And if the government's borrowing up some of that limited supply, then your clever entrepreneurs won't have enough money to borrow.
They're half right, really, though, aren't they? Because they're just failing to make the connection that money equals making resources, available resources.
That's why this stuff gets so slippery, and why sometimes your neoclassical economists, or even your post-Keynesian economists, they can start to sound a little bit MMT, but then you realise they're actually still in the old paradigm of what they mean by resources and what they mean by money.
It's always the cart before the horse with the neoclassical stuff. Yeah.
So there was Paul Barclay putting some questions to his panel saying, are we now more comfortable with debt and deficit, and is that a good thing? Do you think we are?
No. Well, yeah, I think it peaked with Abbott in the 2013 election. He came into that election screaming
the anti-debt and deficit.
Debt and deficit disaster that awaited all of us. It was a hot topic for him, and it got put to bed with COVID, because then the coalition government put.
Well, I'm not so sure now, because there is a. Jim Chalmers, and he seems to still be rather attached to the idea of surpluses.
Okay, let's just have a listen to Jim Chalmers at Question Time.
The Liberals and Nationals made a mess of the budget, and we are cleaning it up. Our responsible budget management is rebuilding our nation's finances and leading to smaller deficits and less debt and lower interest costs. Now, a week before the budget was handed down on the 9th of May, the member for Hume issued a press release that said the test for this budget will be to balance the budget. Well, we are now 8 days before the end of the financial year, and we are on track to deliver the first surplus in 15 years, Mr. Speaker. And what's clear is that we wouldn't be anywhere near a surplus without our spending restraint, our savings. Now, when those opposite came to office, they promised a string of surpluses. They said, and I quote, "We will deliver a surplus in our first year and every year after that." And we all know how that turned out, Mr. Speaker. They went 0 for 9 donuts, Mr. Speaker. The great irony of Australian politics is the Liberals talk about surpluses and the Greens talk about social housing, and in the last decade neither has delivered any of either. In fact, Mr. Speaker, those opposite delivered more consecutive deficits than any government since the 1920s. They delivered the biggest deficits since Federation, Mr. Speaker. It was a decade of debt, a decade of deficit, and a decade of disappointment. Responsible economic management and spending restraint. We take responsibility for cleaning up the mess that they left of the budget.
Yeah, it's complicated, that, isn't it? Because
donuts, Mr. Speaker.
So this has been a bugbear for the Labor government, particularly since Whitlam. Historical context: you had Conservative governments from 48 until 72, when Menzies and then the rest, until it came to a train wreck. And then you had the Whitlam government, who were there for 3 years, and that was during an oil crisis and an inflation period, and they got lambasted for mismanaging the economy.
Everyone thought their spending was creating the inflation when it was not creating the inflation so much. It was the oil price shock.
Yeah, indeed. And when you look at the figures from the Whitlam government, how they stack up, their budget was run really well. It was, and what's more, we still see the benefits of it today with Medicare and.
Jim Chalmers still thinks he needs to run a surplus.
Well, yeah, but that's because that argument's been going on for decades, and they've been lambasted about how you guys can't run a surplus and you're bad financial managers, and to be a good financial manager you need to run a surplus. And so what we're learning is that argument is complete. It's just complete rubbish.
When he's proudly talking about cutting down on spending, what's he doing? He's actually cutting back probably on the budgets for healthcare workers.
Yeah.
So that's why we see them leaving in droves at the moment, because they're so stressed out because they're all understaffed.
But I feel a bit guilty because they've been having this battle for decades and decades and decades, and they've been trying to establish their credentials as being good financial managers by running a surplus, and they've finally won it. And you go, well done, guys, except your argument is totally flawed.
I'm not even going to say well done on that. He should be reframing the conversation so that he is bringing the electorate with him, so that everybody understands that the deficit is the spending that happens that goes into our pockets and provides the social services that we need. If they were doing proper spending, we could have universal dental care tomorrow.
I totally agree with you. The argument is fundamentally flawed, but that battle has been going on since the mid-1970s.
It's kind of interesting to hear it's still going, still raging, isn't it? Where he's accusing them of having the biggest deficit since Federation.
I feel a bit guilty about taking the wind out of your sails by saying, I'm glad that you finally,
Look, I think Jim Chalmers is a nice guy. I think he's well-intentioned, but as they say, the road to hell.
I'd love to get him on the show. That'd be terrific. I'm sort of...
Jim, if you're listening, we'd love to have you.
Any and all treasurers. Put some of our MMT people on Q&A. They tear them to shreds, Anne. We've said this before. It'd be a bloodbath of logic and pragmatism. You'd sort of go, what do we do now? You have to change everything. Could that happen? Could you have a public discussion?
Well, I look forward to it. But until then, Kevin, the world needs Radio MMT.
We've got to get out of the way. We're running overtime, and Vicky is coming up with Mafalda next. Thank you very much for listening to our fifth leg show, and we'll see you on the second...
Back to our normal second Friday.
Second Friday of next month. Just hang on 2 seconds while I sort myself out here because I've...
Fifth Friday is very casual Friday.
It is indeed. Okay, so till next time.
You've been listening to Radio MMT with Anne and Kev.
We'd love your feedback. Email us on radiommt@gmail.com or search Radio MMT on social media.
Listen to this show anytime wherever you get your podcasts or on 3cr.org.au/Radio MMT.
Support this show and the station by subscribing to 3cr.org.au and mention Radio MMT.
We thank all our guests.
And we thank economist Professor Bill Mitchell and his mmted.org, educating the masses on modern monetary theory.
And thank you to our listeners for listening. And I thank you, Kevin.
And I thank you, Anne. So what's planned for next week?
Kevin, there is still so much to talk about. We've got to expose all this rotten economics.
Well, that's good, and I get it. Do you reckon we could use a bit more music?
Well, I made a list of all these terrible economic theories. Like, I've heard of the theory of comparative advantage, or the quantity theory of money, or the loanable funds theory.
Have you heard of a band called Single Gun Theory? Like, they're a really good band. I'm sure there's a whole range of, like, macroeconomic music that I could bring into the show.
Yeah, but we really need to do marginal productivity theory, not to mention the natural rate of unemployment and the money multiplier.
You've got a pretty good singing voice. I play bass. Bill, he plays guitar. I reckon we could form a macroeconomics band. Like, we could deliver this whole message by music.
Well, we could call the band the Permanent Income Hypothesis, or the Ricardian Equivalence, or Rational
I
Expectations.
think we're onto something here. We're trying to make macroeconomics more interesting to the masses. We're going to form this band and sing it to them. And we're going to bring the economists in. We're going to get musical.
We're going to do the regression theory of money to music.
That will work. That's good. Regression theory of money. What rhymes with regression? Regression, suppression, there's a world of opportunity here. This has got legs. This is going to work. You know, Bill's good on guitar. You'll be straight on.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.